The Housing Rebels. This is a chapter from the book by Dr. Asef Bayat, The Housing Rebels. The occupation of homes and hotels, 1979 to 1980, the 1980s. This one starts with a story, which I love because it makes for good video. Sometimes the sociologists lose us with the numbers, but he's a good storyteller. Dr. Asif Bayat, Street Politics. Khaled, Sakine, and Hassan were among the many hundreds who had joined the crowd, carrying their entire belongings in a tremendous rush. Utensils, beds, boxes, and babies hung down from their shoulders, and chickens and children followed the multitude. Mobilized by young activists, the crowd had emerged from a South Tehran slum. Shout out to Tehruni people, that's what they're called, Tehruni. Young men directed the crowd toward an empty building. What are they doing? Upon their arrival, the group flooded into the house, taking up the empty rooms. The activist leaders began putting up banners and billboards around the structure, informing the public that the homeless poor were squatting this vacant home. Thus was a large home in Mirdamad, an upper middle class neighborhood in Tehran, taken over. This was one way in which the poor secured their dwellings. Others, like Hassan's brother Mahmoud, had been involved days earlier in taking over a piece of land in Daulatabad, where he hired his wife's cousin to put up a shelter into which he and his family moved the following day. In the same way as the inhabitants of many neighborhoods who had scattered around like blots of dropped ink, Khaleh, Sakine, and Hassan became homeowners literally overnight. Unlike Hassan's group, Mahmoud's operation was rather discreet and without much clatter. Thus, they began a new life in the new community. The revolution had paid off for both families, as well as many thousands more. This and the following chapters show that the silent revolution, or quiet encroachment, which the urban poor had inaugurated decades prior to the Islamic Revolution, continued ceaselessly after the insurrection of February 1979, albeit in a different context. The new squatters movement represented a break from the past. The Islamic Revolution altered the form and structure of the squatters' activities. Bum. Between 1979 and 1981, under political uncertainty, various political groups emerged, striving to gain popularity and support by mobilizing the disenfranchised groups. The resultant political competition within the oppositional groups and between the opposition and the government offered an opportunity for squatters to mobilize radically. Thus, the squatter poor experience through kinship and individual initiatives, not only creeping direct action, but also some kind of social movement, one characterized by collective effort, some degree of organization and network, and a perception of social change. I'm really unfamiliar with YouTube and all. I'm doing this to not forget English because I don't have anyone to talk about academic stuff with, but Dr. Asif Bayat is still alive, so shout out to him. Taking over homes and hotels. The new squatters movement emerged against the background of the insurrection of February 10th and 11th, 1979, when the Islamic Revolution had reached its climax. An enormous energy had been released and a tremendous void had emerged. In this moment of madness, the body politic tingled with every little move in any segment within the society. It was a time of great dualities, of enormous hope and despair, of exhaustion and rejuvenation, of relaxation and energy, and of a sense of job done and work to begin. Sounds like 2026. The central authority had collapsed. There was no secret police, no municipality guards, not even a traffic police. There are a lot of films about this time, and they really creep me out when I watch it because I don't want to live in those times as me. But, I'm not, them. So, following the insurrection, the power vacuum began to be filled by various grassroots organizations. as well as by opportunistic, self-declared power heirs in various sectors of the society. Many business people deserted companies. Managers left factories. The rich abandoned homes, hurriedly leaving behind million-dollar properties. In the end, some 150,000 housing units, palaces, hotels, villas, and unfinished apartment blocks remained. Their original owners had either rushed to the west, meaning, London, or were in hiding somewhere in the country. The properties would later fall under the control of Bunyad-i Mustasafin, the foundation of the dispossessed. Landless peasants confiscated large agribusiness estates. Hundreds of factories were taken over by workers, and the state offices began to be run by their employees. The revolutionary youth took the charge of the city police. Even the unemployed, who lacked any institutions, took control of the streets by regulating the traffic. It was a time of role playing, of making a difference, of being counted, of taking revenge, of seizing the moment. Jai Mata Di. It was the moment of madness of the new social order that the new squatters movement came into life. Only days after the insurrection, a group of tent settlers at the southern margin of the capital warned that if the new regime did not provide them with decent housing, we will occupy vacant apartments. 2 days later, some 300 families, most of them armed, took over apartment blocks in Daulatabad in South Tehran. In the days and weeks that followed, thousands of homeless families, poor tenants, and students joined the protagonists in Tehran and other urban centers, occupying empty apartment blocks, luxury homes, villas, and deserted hotels. Tehran witnessed the largest incidents of squatting, mainly in the southern plain of the city, but homes, hotels, and apartments were occupied in other areas as well. 4,500 villas had been taken over by people in the first months. Home invasions took place collectively. People mobilized together on December 21st, 1979. Some 30 families from the poor neighborhoods of Maidan-e-Sush and Goldnishinan in South Tehran took over half-finished apartments near Islamabad in the southeastern plain, not to be confused with the Pakistan Islamabad. The group was led by a 30-year-old left-wing factory worker. The news spread among neighbors and acquaintances, and hundreds of families from the vicinity invaded the area. About 400 households occupied 308 homes. In another early operation at the beginning of 1980, some 41 squatter families who occupied homes located in South Tehran forced the municipality to supply them ready-made apartments in Sharak-e-Sush. The government purchased occupied homes from the settlers in order to level them for development. A few communities grew even larger as the occupation of newly built apartments continued. About 500 families had settled in the township of Kian Sheher by 1985. So Sheher means city in Farsi and Hindi. Kian Sheher. Young activists played a crucial part in organizing the homeless. We were a group of workers who had known each other for years. We began planning to expropriate so many vacant homes and apartments. The core group had some 20 members, each relating to a dozen contacts who were active in popular areas such as Shad Sheher, Darwaze-Gar, and Halabiabad. So in the previous live, it was about Halabiabad. I can't believe there's a place called Darwaze-Gar, which means house door? Door house? Darwaze-Gar. The core group would identify vacant properties, and the contact teams mobilized the homeless and brought them to the target buildings. We would begin our invasion in a specific time. Then men, women, and children carrying their utensils, rugs, heaters, beds, and whatever would join the occupation. So I was watching this Korean reality show, and they invited all these celebrities to move into the house, and they had to bring a lot of their own things too. And the building where they were shooting the reality show was formerly a consulate for a Soviet person or Russian. I wasn't sure, but life is a dream. In this manner, they occupied buildings in the Shah Sheher Mirdamad, a neighborhood near Maidan-e-Azadi, Maidan-e-Inqilab, and Khiaban Hashemi. Provincial cities also experience home invasions. And then he goes in talk about how different social groups were occupying the suburbs. The apartments were originally supposed to be allocated to flood victims, but they were occupied. Beyond homes and apartments, many luxury hotels also became the target of highly organized occupations in which university students took the lead. The students participated not only as mobilizers of the poor, but also as beneficiaries in their own right. During October 1979, over 1,000 students complaining that the government failed to provide them with suitable dorms took over the International Hotel and the Royal Garden Hotel on Taht-e-Jamshid Avenue. Around the same time, mostly left-wing students occupied the Hotel Imperial, the Hotel Sina, and more in Tehran. The students soared the resistance of the employees who were afraid of losing their jobs. The squatters guarded the buildings, resisting the informal group organized by some clergy who attempted to oust the original occupiers. The major impetus for the hotel occupations came under the radical Islamic groups who mushroomed in those days under the leadership of figures such as Ayatollah Beheshti, Sheikh Mohammed Karoubi, and Hojat al-Islam Hadi Khosrow Shahi, who sanctioned and guided the activities of the militant students in taking over the hotels and villas. These clerical leaders were not only constructing mass support for themselves, they were also undermining the weak provisional government. Sheikh Mohammed Karoubi, brother of Mehdi Karoubi, began his agitation activities by seizing a two-story house in North Tehran, Sera-e-Zarab Khane, as the headquarters for his Committee for Housing for the Downtrodden. Around him gathered young men from different walks of life, mujtahid, lots or street bullies and opportunists. Many of them came from South Tehran. Bands of young males grouped in the streets, identifying homes, hotels, and land for the sheikh, who would officially assign these dwelling places for his own associates and the needy as well. I received a few assignment orders stated a participant in the operations, and consequently, I managed to transfer about 10 families from Naziabad into those homes, quote unquote. Immediately following an occupation, the squatters would appoint a committee, a shura, to take care of the internal order within the buildings and organize against external threats of eviction. In the occupied hotels and shuras assigned to rooms to needy students who came largely from provincial towns. Normally, each room was given to 2 or more students. For instance, I used to live with my parents in Tehran, but I shared a room with a friend in a hotel. In line with their ideological commitment, the students often took organizational work very seriously. They held largely free elections for the shuras and formed various committees to operate the daily lives of the residents. The Hotel Royal Garden formed committees to deal with residents, transportation, cooperation with the employees, and defense. These students, both girls and boys, maintained order and discipline, protecting the hotel by a 24-hour patrol of the building. Most squatters came from poor migrant families who either could not afford to pay rent or were living in tents in other parts of the city. In Dalatabad, the newcomers came from various poor communities of South Tehran, including shacks of Tehran Pars, Tehran Vela, Darvazegar, Naziabad, and Maidan Isush. We used to live in a damp basement, said a woman squatter in Dalatabad. I get terrified thinking that we might still be forced to return to that place. Residents in the squatter settlements of Halab Sheher and District 2 seized the opportunity to upgrade their position, moving into empty apartments and houses located in Mahalaya Siraj. Not all the squatters came from poor backgrounds, nor were all desperate striving for a place. Some relatively affluent developers and local bullies also furthered their own interests. They claimed some squatters had already owned the home. They simply sold these to make money. Some of them, he reported, had escaped from prison during the revolutionary chaos. They were now involved in gambling and drug dealing. Corruption at the level of officials themselves also played a role. The Pastaran committees, who were in charge of controlling the neighborhoods, were later assigned to expropriate the apartments and give the number of homes away to their own relatives and ideologically correct families. The mass of student squatters was mostly from the provincial towns. Their complaints about their accommodation problems in the rent-notorious capital city dated back to many years before the revolution, yet the logic behind their mobilization had less to do with an immediate need for housing and more with a desire to negate the opulence that they admired in private but turned against because they could hardly afford to be part of it. For leftists, as one leader put it, the occupation of the hotels which belonged to the large capitalists was in accordance with our political and ideological lines. These radical measures also fit well with the strategy of the hardline Islamic leaders of putting pressure on the moderate provisional government of Mehdi Bazargan. The largely political motive of the students in taking over properties were later reflected in their early evictions by the authorities. The poor began to consolidate their positions immediately, unlike the students who dilly-dallied. Squatting for them represented a long-awaited objective they could not afford to lose. Once they moved in, they began completing the unfinished apartments, putting up windows, glasses, and tiles. They spent around $280 in 1979 to install doors and windows. Shebek, in Arabic, Shebek, within the occupied buildings. The left-wing activists organized literary and language classes, held political and ideological meetings, and taught social skills. Upon squatting, some men began opening their businesses, whether in apartments by the door or in the street. Butcher shops were opened, grocery shops started to operate, and the unemployed looked for jobs on construction sites. Yet most men maintained their previous occupations. Like their fathers, children too had to commute long hours to attend their previous schools. So even when they're squatting, they're going to their old schools. The problems of the squatters who had resided in the affluent parts of North Tehran seemed greater. They had to shop in the store of the affluent. Class tension remained another problem. In their gestures, jokes, and day-to-day interactions, the rich expressed their distaste over being dispossessed. None of these shortcomings, however, reduced the attraction of being the master of one's own dwelling. Thus, the biggest challenge remained to protect these homes from the forces of eviction. To this end, some families made sure that a family member stayed in the house during the day. Some men who stayed behind lost their jobs, so it was mainly women who undertook the task of dealing with authorities and defending the dwellings. Like the students, the poor squatters in a number of communities went as far as to constitute more structured organizations. The shuras, or appointed councils, represented and organized the inhabitants of a building or many occupied blocks within the neighborhood. The shuras bore the responsibility of tackling the problems that might jeopardize the inhabitants' security of tenure. They were to upgrade the community, deal with day-to-day problems, maintain cleanliness, resolve disputes, and administer cultural events. More immediately, they were to coordinate the relations of the communities within the outside world, including hostile neighbors and especially the original owners of the properties. "400 families in southwestern Tehran had taken over 308 apartments, and they elected councils to deal with the takeover. The households of each street elected 3 representatives altogether, making a 21-person General Assembly. The G8 elected a 5-member Central Council, which was to meet once a week and was responsible for the decisions concerning the entire neighborhood. Once consolidated, the council went so far to create a coordinated council to organize all squatters. It organized rallies and called for a rent strike. In this sense, the associations attested to the spatial solidarity among the inhabitants, who came from different social, ethnic, and linguistic backgrounds but shared one important goal: protecting and upgrading the already occupied homes. Out of this common interest and mechanical solidarity based on John E. Davis termed domestic property, grew friendship and kinship ties. Young adults within the communities married, neighbors looked after each other's children and watched one another's belongings, and children played with their new playmates. Despite the rejuvenated mood, the specter of the bearded pastaran and the nightmare of eviction kept haunting these housing rebels. Knowing or unknowingly, they violated a fundamental property right that all the governments in the post-revolution period was committed to protect. The confrontation between the squatters and authorities thus seemed unavoidable. To be continued. Thank you all for joining. Bissalam.